For those of you who may not know, I'm a lifeguard at the YMCA, just across the street. Now, lifeguarding's a pretty solid job, and through it I've gotten to teach swim lessons and help coach the team. Something I've thoroughly enjoyed. In reality, the actual guarding portion of the job is rather menial. We sit there and we watch over the pool, enforcing the rules and ensuring a safe environment is maintained at all times. We are taught to scan the pool every 10 seconds, counting and recounting every swimmer to ensure we're keeping track of everyone. Every once in a while, we may have to help a younger child with a deep end test or ensure a game of catch stays contained. But for the most part, our job consists of scanning the pool, counting heads, and being ready if something goes awry. When I sat down to begin writing this, my mom approached me, not quite wanting to interrupt, but wanting to share an idea she had. She's incredibly supportive, and she loves to share input whenever I'm struggling with an idea. She brought up the topic of lifeguarding, comparing it first to her past roles as a supervisor, whether it be of students or of airplanes taxiing around a runway. Her first major career was an air traffic control officer for the Air Force. Her job, to put it simply, was to control the air around the base, ensuring everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be when they needed to be there. Afterwards, she became a teacher, and now is an administrator at my school. She spends a lot of time working with students and helping organize activities or new learning experiences for those who need it. In both cases, as a teacher and an air traffic controller, she too was there, in a way, to count heads. Part of her job was to keep watch over everything going on in her domain, to keep everyone safe, and to be ready when the time called for action. I'll admit, at first, I didn't really see where she was going with this. I already had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to talk about, and I was only half listening. See, when Jessica asked me to choose a weekend for Youth Sunday, I did what many of us do when presented with a daunting task. I said I would figure it out tomorrow, and I promptly forgot about it. When I got around to reading the different Gospels and picking the one that resonated with me, the obvious choice was the one we read today. It originally stuck out to me on a surface level. I appreciated Jesus' comparison between being a good leader and, well, not. It got me thinking about what leadership really meant and how he wants us to lead in our everyday lives. When I came back to writing the sermon, I did a deeper dive. I sat down with Jessica and asked what the context of today's gospel was. As we heard, Jesus is talking to a group of people, telling them a story about the difference between a good shepherd and a hired hand. However, when you look closer, there's a beautiful complexity to his lesson from today. First, a little recap from the previous episode. In the Gospel according to John, chapter 9, Jesus finds a blind man begging and rubs mud onto his eyes before telling him to go wash them in the pool of Siloam. When he did this and opened his eyes, he could see. Now, some powerful people in the area did not approve of his actions, and as Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the Pharisees came to the man and the man's parents, angry that this blasphemy had taken place. When the chapter ends, Jesus is standing among an angry crowd, trying to figure out how he can help them understand that his healing miracle was more important than the established rules. This is when we get to today's gospel. Jesus creates this comparison. He calls himself the Good Shepherd, contrasting the role to a hired hand. The Good Shepherd, he tells us, will lay down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, upon seeing an approaching wolf, will flee, leaving the flock to defend for themselves. He goes on to tell the crowd that he has sheep from other pens to take under his wing. There is only one flock, he tells them, and they should all listen to his voice. Hired hands, in this story, make choices according to a different value structure than the shepherds. Good shepherds do not make decisions for their own betterment, but for the protection of the flock and for all those who seek protection. As Jesus stands before this crowd, teaching his lesson about the flock and the shepherd, he is living in the situation he describes. He stands here protecting the man he healed, while the wolves circle, hungry for their next meal. While he teaches us the example of the Good Shepherd, he is the acting embodiment of a Good Shepherd, living his lesson in the moments that he's teaching it. I believe this is what he really wants us to understand about leadership. It is not about leading from the front, or leading from the back, or telling people what to do when we know they will listen. True leadership is about standing there in the midst of conflict and fighting for what you care about, protecting the flock and each member of it. Leadership is not just leading people. It is the idea of leading through respect, through action, and through love. And above all, putting the needs of others before your own. Leadership is something I've been thinking a lot about recently. Being at a transitional point in my life has made me evaluate who I want to be going forward. Throughout our youth, we look up to people above us and unknowingly begin forming our own ideas about who we want to be when we grow up. This goes beyond the simple, high-achieving careers we told our friends about. I wanted to be an astronaut. And reaches into the depths of who we are as people. We are always learning. And as we decide what type of person we want to be, we take a lot from the people surrounding us. I often catch myself watching trusted adults and local leaders as they deal with the mess that life so often presents us with. I try to learn from how they respond, taking mental notes of the good and the bad. In 65 days, I will leave for basic training before starting school at the Air Force Academy in the fall, where I hope to learn to be a leader. The lessons I am learning, so these lessons are becoming more and more important. I've become cognizant of this influence and have come to realize there are a lot of hired hands in the world, but there are also many good shepherds. The difference between the two lies not in their actions necessarily, but in their intent, the purpose with which they carry out their actions as leaders. Leadership is this big, scary word that carries with it a lot of weight and responsibility. When we hear people talk about leadership, it often comes with words like power and control. But I don't think that's what Jesus wants us to think about it. The example of a shepherd may be a little outdated, but as my mom hinted at earlier, the basic principles of leadership are still the same. Earlier, I talked about lifeguarding, teaching, and being an air traffic controller, all of which involve counting heads and realizing that every choice you make has a very real impact on the experience of others. To me, that sounds an awful lot like being a shepherd. Leadership, in these situations, is not about having power over everyone looking up to you. It is about recognizing the influence your decisions have on the experience of others. Leadership should not be an inherently powerful thing. Leadership is an act of love, an act of service. A good shepherd loves the flock and will stand, as Jesus did, in the middle of danger for their sake. Leadership is not about the leader. It is about the others. Now, I'll admit, wolves are certainly less of a threat now to sheep than they were during the life of Jesus. And not everyone can be a leader by position. So how does this parable apply to all of us? Ever since I knew I was preaching, I felt pressure to have some grandiose life lesson to leave you all with this morning. I'm sorry to say, I do not. But I think that's okay. Life is not always about the grandiose lessons or the big moments. Sometimes, life is about the quiet, simple moments, the ones that make a difference simply because of who we are and what we decide to do. Jesus taught us what good leadership looks like when he stood there, calmly defending his actions after getting his hands dirty, both metaphorically and physically with the mud he used to heal, and protecting the man to which he granted sight. I ask you all, as you go forward in life, to look for these smaller moments, the ones where leadership would not necessarily be recognized, but where you can still step up and protect the flock. Whether it be holding the door for somebody, helping clean up after a meal, or cheering on that teammate struggling to finish their race at the track invite yesterday. Not to say any names, but it was me. I was the teammate. Go forth and put effort into committing acts of love to lift up fellow members of the flock. The Lord is our shepherd, but that does not mean we cannot act as shepherds of our own flock, as the Lord wills us. Leadership is not a position or a title. I mean, the blind man didn't even know who Jesus was until after he was healed. Leadership is about acting through love for your neighbors and living a life of service to your flock. We can all be the shepherd in our own way, as Jesus has taught us, by staying true to ourselves, strong in our convictions, and proud of the impact we have on others. Go out and lead through love, and in a world full of sheep and wolves, be the good shepherd. Amen.